It is our pleasure to welcome you to this mini symposium on diversity and inclusion hosted by the IPPF South Asia Regional Office. We are fortunate to have a remarkable lineup of speakers who are experts in this field. This session will focus on an engaging Q&A session, allowing for a dynamic exchange of ideas and perspectives. I encourage all of you to engage actively in the discussion, ask questions, and share your. Our moderator for today is Sylvester Merchant, also known as Sylvie, the Regional Community Engagement and Networks lead at IPPF SARO. Sylvester is an LGBTQIA activist who is deeply involved with health and rights movement across South Asia. Thank you all for being here today. I would now like to hand over the session to our moderator, Sylvie. Sylvie will introduce our esteemed speakers and guide us through the Q&A discussion. Let's engage in meaningful dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi. Okay. So my job title, when I applied, actually read disruptive partnerships. And we want this room to be active as possible, especially when also kind of directly relates to claiming us when we talk about inclusive SRHR. I clearly remember for the first time when I actually heard word SR and start to kind of have an understanding, basically at least from the very Indian context, or even for that matter South Asian. First things was the vector HIV, people who will kind of cause you HIV in the key populations and doing a lot of work around that. But yes, what happens to this was more about MSM, men who have sex with men, and then came in transgender women. And that was the only reference which we used to kind of hear or get, or even, and then all the rest of the other identities totally silent on. I think for decades, I would even we do talk about inclusive SRHR, but in reality, how much have we actually progressed even into the understanding of it? Forget about inclusivity, even the understanding for that is also in a way very questionable. Anyway, I don't want to kind of rant on to what my own personal experiences are around this. Rather than that, I would actually like to now invite my speakers, basically. So with that, may I request Anaya, Rahimi, who is Pakistan's only transgender stand-up comedian, who holds a bachelor in business administrative from ComSets, Lahore, and has a diverse background in business development, project coordination, and advocacy, with experience at Gateway Insurance, Brokes in Dubai, and a lot of other private limited companies. Importantly, Anaya also is part of a community-based organization and has been working for communities since quite a long. Thank you, Anaya, for being part of this panel. I would now request Soudeh. Soudeh Rad is a non-binary, eco-queer, feminist Iranian gender equality activist. They have merged the online and offline activities individually, but also in Spectrum, the eco-queer feminist NGO they have founded 10 years ago. Welcome, my dear friend. The third on the list is Aritha. Aritha Wickramasinghe is the Equality Director at iProbono and General Counsel at TWC Investment Bank, with a background as an investment banking lawyer for Chance and K&L Gates in London. He has held roles including head of legal at Sri Lanka's Ministry of Finance and advisor to the Government of Financial, Economic and Educational Reforms. Appointed as a President Advisor in 2023, Aritha Aritha supports Sri Lanka's IMF-backed economic and social reform agenda and advises the Ministry of Water and Estate Infrastructure Development, known for his advocacy for women, children, and LGBTQI rights. He was recognized as the #1 future business leader by the Financial Times in 2015 as a young role model by Sri Lankan Unites in 2020. Last but the least, our own very much Sonal Giani. Sonal Giani is a dynamic activist with over 15 years of experience advocating for LGBTQIA rights in India and South Asia, currently serving as a board member with UNAIDS program coordinating board and as an NGO delegate for the AIDS specific region and holding the position for global senior advisor, gender and inclusion at the International Planned Parenthood Federation. She offers valuable technical assistance facilitating the implementation of inclusive strategies and empowerment approaches in the field of sexual and reproductive health and rights. Thank you, Sonal, for being a part of this panel. Now, let me kind of come here. Thank you so much. So this is as we promised that this is going to be more of a interactive and also at many times I would say informal, strongly community owned space. So we want it to be kind of that way. So we can actually start with Anaya. So Anaya, with your work, especially with the trans communities in Pakistan, what are the key challenges which are faced by trans individuals in accessing SRHR services in Pakistan?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Mainly the key challenges are compounded of social stigma and legal inequities, and also the healthcare provider biasness. What actually is happening right now is transgender people in Pakistan are not getting SRHR services as per their basic needs. There are a lot of organizations which are working for SRHR services, but mainly in HIV and STI sector. But if we talk about the hormone therapy, HRT, and the surgeries, the transition surgeries, it's not happening in Pakistan, and due to financial issues as well, because trans community in Pakistan is not financially strong to get the proper surgeries through proper channel as well. Other than that, the healthcare providers are not well trained to deal with the trans related issues, basic needs in medical care. They're not trained, and sometimes if a trans person goes to the healthcare provider for their mental issues and for the surgeries, for the HRT, there is another thing, they are related to the religious values, and it's very contradictory because they're considered as these issues are considered as mental illness or un-Islamic, because in Islam it's another thing, the Shariat code. So due to that, they are also refused for the SRHR services mostly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Soudeh, we would like to know more about your work, and when we say inclusive SRHR, what are your I'm sure a lot of strong community voices around here, but then what's your take on this?
Hello, everyone, again. I want to be short and disruptive. So inclusive SRHR work is everything that we saw this morning, not do that. So since this morning we didn't see any disabled body on the screen, we didn't hear about the LGBT community that much. We were divided into men and women, girls and boys. The numbers that were shown to us were exactly what you shouldn't do when you're working on SRHR. In the case of Iran, so myself and my friend and work partner Zainab, we decided to create Spectrum because we saw this big lack of working on inclusive SRHR issues. Before that, we were activists, individual activists, and we were always considered as these disruptive individuals. And then we started this organization to be a disruptive organization. And since 10 years now, we have already had 7 projects, and we divided into different projects because we want to be inclusive. We say the same thing, of course, because we want to be authentic, but we use different languages for different audiences. We use a more soft language when we're talking about women, sexual women who are in a marriage under the Islamic Republic of Iran law. Then we talk more openly and with proper words that we want to teach to children through storytelling and so on. So inclusive and being inclusive and respecting the diversity is not about inviting somebody on the panel, but really sit with yourself and see who is really left behind. Who am I not seeing here? We were just talking with about the beautiful educative leaflets that were presented to us all this morning. And this is exactly what you shouldn't do. You cannot put a white blonde woman picture in a Sri Lankan sex education leaflet. This is what makes people totally not resonate with sex education and say, well, this is not our culture, this is their culture, and this is what you're facing. And maybe tomorrow we will talk about the opposition, how we're facing the opposition and the whole thing. As soon as I hear we have to be sensitive to culture, I'm like, culture has always evolved because culture is made of human beings, and I am one of those human beings. And we are living in a global society. Anything that happens here has an effect on me living in France, has an effect on me living somewhere in Iran. So I think it's a very, very fine line between knowing the culture and starting to talk that language and fall into cultural relativism and just being stuck where we shouldn't be stuck.
So true. Couldn't agree more, actually. Okay, so, the next question is for Aritha. With a huge body of work, especially in terms of, decrim work, which is still ongoing, how can legal and policy reforms in Sri Lanka better address the intersectional challenge faced by LGBT individuals, particularly with respect to access to reproductive and sexual in this country?
Thank you, Sylvester. I mean, as you pointed out in your question, decrim is still not finished in Sri Lanka, right? So unlike our neighbor here, India, we haven't even come to the topic of discussing about discrimination in accessing healthcare and other services, because we're still right at the bottom of criminalization, right? How we're talking about how do we give people perceived by the law as criminals and equitable access to healthcare services and other public services as any citizen. But we've managed, despite the challenges of the law, we have managed to push through certain policy initiatives and push for different interpretations of the law. So I've been very lucky with the legal sector here, where we have put out challenges in court where, LGBT plus persons, especially, a lesbian man or a gay man, being prosecuted not because they have been caught having some kind of sexual relationship, but just because they have declared their sexual orientation, and where lesbian women, gay men, and trans people have been subjected to forced anal and vaginal examinations to find evidence that they were homosexual, right? And these examinations are being conducted by health professionals. So they are part of this, they're part of this, the community which is actually perpetuating this violence and discrimination against LGBT people is also the health sector. And that's a problem. I mean, there were some cases which we went through where a lesbian woman was being subjected to a vaginal examination to find evidence that she was homosexual in order to be presented as evidence to prosecute her. And the doctor's report was actually saying how he could only insert one finger into her vagina and not two, and that the vagina was tight, presenting that she was probably a virgin and therefore she must be a lesbian. right? So in a way, like being a virgin is also now a criminal offense, as is being a lesbian as well, right? I mean, these are horrific crimes committed by the health sector against LGBT people. So, I mean, one thing we did was we exposed what was happening, and through exposure of what was happening and creating a public outcry about it, we got first started with a directive from the Justice Ministry that these examinations need to stop. And then we got a circular issued from the police, which also said that the police cannot participate in these kinds of examinations. And the Justice Ministry issued this circular because these judicial medical officers, even though they're part of the health sector, they are assigned to the Justice Ministry. Then also in the Health Ministry guidelines, there are, within that policy, there is that persons cannot be discriminated based on their SOGI characteristics. We were also able to pass very recently a Women's Empowerment Act, which recognizes expressly the right to equality for women, but also includes in it that women cannot be discriminated based on SOGI. So there is, at least for women now, there is a certain right of protection through policy and legislation. So those are some of the victories we've had in order to create a safer space legally for the LGBT plus community, but that doesn't mean that in practice that it has necessarily become safer. But at least now at least for the community, there is some kind of assurance that should they be denied their access to health or an equitable treatment when they're accessing health, there's some kind of law and policy document which backs him up. So they're a bit better protected, but that does not necessarily mean that they're better served.
Thank you. I'm sure a lot of people have questions, and then we will open for that as well. Coming to Sonal, actually. Sonal, I remember you were part of the sex work assessment, which was done by South Asia Regional. And why, because from the morning, I think we have a lot of community members, basically, we are so much discussing about heteronormativity of the event in many ways. And also, more inclusive is the necessity. And can you just tell us about what actually, what has come out of that, and very, very importantly, why at this juncture and why?
I think it started with the International Planned Parenthood Federation actually coming out with a policy on sex work. There were a lot of differing, conflicting, sometimes opposing opinions around sex work, but this is a community that we are clearly working with, and it's a high priority community. And the reason it has been a high priority communities, I mean, there are so many communities that are key populations, that are marginalized communities that you have to work. The reason we had to kind of tilt towards sex workers and LGBTQIA is a kind of pattern that you're noticing of a rampant criminalization that is spreading across the globe against sex workers and against LGBTQIA populations, which literally puts them at the risk of death in simple words as that. So, following the sex work policy, which was also very highly consultative process, because, we've been working with the sex worker community, and they were like, that's nice, you keep calling us to conferences and things, and we get to talk, but then what after that? And so, to keep the commitment, we needed to have something in the form of a policy, that as a federation, what do you believe in? What are you going to do? And so it started really with the policy, and following the policy, I think it was so important for us to understand the context of our region, South Asia region. So before you even start working with sex worker community, instead of expecting them to educate you, it's important you also, do your homework. And so that is why the South Asia region, following that, the approach of the policy, decided that let's work on doing an assessment of the South Asia region. So that's how basically it began. And how we did it was very similar to the policy process, where it was one, of course, all our members in those different countries, they were consulted with, but also sex worker communities were consulted with. And the external consultant actually was a community-based organization of sex work. So they are the ones who conducted the whole research. And they actually a fantastic organization called Ashodhya Samiti, which has trained sex workers to do research. So they were the body who came
community-based organization.
Community-based organization. So, but I think in terms of what are the findings that came out, to kind of keep it brief, of course, in terms of the legal situation, right? It's one, the criminalization, there are different levels of criminalization in different parts of the South Asia region. and essentially, more than, one could say, right, in terms of the sex worker community, the majority that we speak about them in the sexual reproductive health and rights space is around HIV, as though HIV is a big problem. But actually, the study, the assessment clearly, points out that it's not HIV, it's stigma and discrimination, and it's violence, and all of this is very much connected to the political and legal situation. And so there were certain factors which were very common across regions, but there were certain which were very unique to particular countries. So the common pieces were, of course, the fact that there isn't like full decriminalization. It is used against people, so they are very much at risk. The body in the public space is constantly at risk of being harmed or violated with. Then there are certain laws where it looks like it's good, they have said that we are okay with with sex work, but not with prostitution. So then they are criminalizing a pimp, but actually essentially what's happening is that raids happen in the country, and then you are actually, as a sex worker, you are at sort of risk. And then there might be certain situations where okay, everything is fine, but all the access is not available because whoever is at the at the final service provider end is just not this thing, so you get more harm. And again, if something happens to you, say even if say I am a sex worker who is, it's not criminal, for example, if I'm an Indian and it's not criminal to do sex work, but say something violent happened with me, say a client actually raped me, right? So the thing is, it is understood that this was against your consent, it's a rape. But in terms of really finding a legal provider who will support you through that thing will be different somehow. Which brings me to the social aspect of it. The understanding across is that there's no consent for a sex worker. And again, because this is a different region, the definition of sex work, there are many different elements of how people understand sex work to be, and how they are conflating it with, say, prostitution or trafficking. So that is another element. But if I talk about certain things, like there are certain countries where, because people are migrating into the country, you don't have enough laws, or because there are Islamic laws, it's far more sort of rigorous. Also, you may be living in an island, so your access to health is very, very different. But I think, if I had to sort of summarize, I'd come back to that. The problem is not the sex work as an identity, it's really the stigma which is causing most of the problem, all of the problem.
And I can surely draw so much of parallels with the situation before decriminalization, when 377 was still there in India. And especially with trans communities, Hijra communities.
Actually, if I may, I wanted to add that one point, that somehow sex worker, the conversations that are happening in spaces outside of sex worker community-based conversations, they are very much in silos, as though a sex worker is a singular identity. But actually, a sex worker can be a trans person, a sex worker can be a married woman, she could be a pregnant sex worker, she could be a trans sex worker. So there are so many elements. You want to look at it intersectionally, which across is missing.
Thank you for adding that. And since now we've started talking about policy, I remember the Trans Person Protection of Right 2000, especially Pakistan. Does it help, or does it even help you as trans? Even for I can also draw so much of parallels with India, because we do have an act. But I think it pisses communities more than
it's an act. It's also an act. As an act is an act.
It's an act. So just be really open about it.
This is where the stand-up comedian comes in. No. So, yes, the answer is no, but I will explain. So, I will explain a little bit about the Trans Protection Right Act 2018. We worked so hard for it, and it took us almost 6-7 years. We started this journey in 2011 when Almas Bobby, a very huge name from Pakistan, old school activists, senior activists, she started protest against the rights and the violence and the harassment which was happening to the Hijra community, to the Khwaja Sara community. In Pakistan, we call it Khwaja Sara. So it happened since 2011, and then we all were boys before the transition. Not boys, I should say. We were acting as boys to get education. So we were getting our education in the universities, but we were seeing that something is happening and we have to put our effort into it because we're getting the education. So all of our group, I belong to the first educated group of transgender people in Pakistan. We were 9 trans women and 2 trans men who collectively started working on the law. We did our research. We went to the the root of the community and do the questionnaires, the research. What do you want? What is the actual need? What should we do? What should we write in the law? And then we contacted the lawyers, the allies, the good lawyers who were ready to support us. It was not easy. The discussion was very difficult. You start talking about the trans rights and the T is from LGBTQI community. And, they were like, no, this will happen. And everything actually happened. The Shariat law, the Islamic law, they started opposing this since the beginning. But I think God was in our favor, yes, for the first time for Pakistan. And it happened. We were shocked. Even we were shocked. We filed the petition and we filed this act in the parliament. And we were like, at least something has happened. We know it's not to be passed. And it did. It happened, and we were like, wow, it happened. We celebrated it. Everything was there. The basic needs, the education, the employment, the healthcare services, self-identity. Self-identity was a huge step in Pakistan. Because anywhere in Pakistan you go and you tell that I'm a trans woman, they will tell you to take off your pants. We want to look. Even it's my personal experience. When I used to go to the hospitals before the law, the doctors, the moment they find out that I'm trans, they're like, are you sexually active? Because I had a sore throat and he connected it with a STI. I was shocked. I said, which STI is this in my throat? Please, can you explain it? I'm confused. So the condition was so bad. And then the doctor actually told my father that we need to check her if she's a real intersex or not, a real Khwaja Sara. So we also use the intersex terminology in the law. The concept was intersex, but we use the word transgender. At that time, our educated politicians and the Shariat mullahs, they didn't know about transgender term. So they were considering it as intersex. So they were fine with it because intersex had the word sex and they were like, no, nothing, no sex. So transgender was fine with them. Sex was not. So it happened. The law was passed. We were so happy. And it's 2024. If you ask about the change after the law, I think 0.000009% because the things are still same. I and all of my friends, we were, the law says it's on the paper, it's passed, everything is there. It says that we will not be discriminated in the public spaces. We will get the equal healthcare opportunities, equal employment opportunities, equal educational opportunities, and there will be no discrimination in that case. But what is happening actually, we are getting the law, they didn't define the protocols or the mechanism to implement the law. The implementation is so weak. And now we are protesting for the implementation, and it's been 8 years, almost 8 years. It's the conditions are same. When we go for our CNIC, we tell them that we're trans, we have the self-identity X. They're like, which law says that? Show us the law. I still have the law in my phone because whenever I have to discuss it in the police station for the violence cases, I handle violence cases in Punjab, Lahore, and all the cities and villages around. Whenever I go to the police station, I am telling them, no, actually, sir, we have a law. So these guys are culprits. Which law? Sorry, we don't get any intimation from the government. Can you show us the law? And then I have to show them the law. Literally, I have to show them the law. They're like, there is a law. Okay, we will see what kind of, because rape is still the vaginal. Yes.
Vaginal.
Yes. So trans people, we still have the 377 law. I don't even want to speak. So rape is very difficult to register this to the police and to the authorities that this is rape. They're like, how can we, this is not rape as per our understanding. We will put violence and harassment. So there are no cases for rapes because they cannot do it. Our law doesn't say that. So the implementation is so weak. We're still trying to, pressurize the government. We are trying to do the protests, talk about it more through social media, through the protests and the meetings and the conferences, that now is the time implement the law. Implementation is very, otherwise we were standing at the same place before the law. It's just a paper which has been passed and it's there in our constitution. Other than that, it's not.
Okay. I think it's the same
Same
story
in
in India also. But yes, the decrim has happened, so it's still there's some space, I would say. But having said so, talking about laws and talking about restrictive settings, coming back to Soudeh, especially Iran, everyone knows. So and very new ways of working, especially spectrum. In that context, what strategies can ensure the security of personal data, which is collected through digital platforms, while building trust with marginalized groups to address concerns about surveillance and privacy? How do you navigate?
It's very difficult, but possible. So first of all, I just wanted to mention that LGBTI, there's also a B, and we should not forget that bi plus people, women and people and men are also facing a lot of discrimination. It's not only lesbian and gay and trans people, it's a bigger community, just to say that. Well, the case of Iran, I don't know if everyone knows Iran because it's so normal that we hear something new every day from that government. I think they have some fantastic dreams and they come up every day like, from today on, we're gonna just stop vasectomy. And maybe we should also not give access to condoms or something like that, or anything else really ridiculous. Child marriage in Iran is very legal, very, very legal, and abortion is very, very illegal. Having access to contraceptives is almost illegal now, let alone the abortion. So we're facing a government which has a lot of power, and we cannot undermine the power that they have and the money that they are putting into systematically create and reinforce the violence, gender and sexual-based violence. I think you all might have seen what happened a couple of days ago. Ahu Daryai, student, just took off her clothes, said, okay, you don't want me to do this, I'm gonna do this. And they just put her in a psychiatric hospital. And this is what they do. They're anybody who is not cis hetero person and totally listening to the government guidelines is sick, including trans people, including intersex people, including a person like me, because I'm totally crazy and I'm so immoral and I'm just sitting in my nice place in France and just activating people inside the country. So yeah, I'm actually activating people inside the country. How we do it? As diaspora-based organization, like any other organization, and that is very historical because as of even before the revolution happened, there were a lot of immigrants because the regime before the mullahs was not very, it was not democratic at all, let alone very. So the idea of diaspora activism is not new to the Iranians, as it's not new to many people in our country. But with the arrival of internet, and I was 13 years old when it arrived, so it was a new oxygen buffet, as we call it in French. And we started to use internet to really become the activists of people. And we always remember that behind any ID, let it be on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, there's actually we hope, there's actually a person sitting there that we can have actually impact on them. So when it comes to privacy and collecting data, we don't collect data. We respect highly the privacy of both our team members, but also those people who are using our services. And for the sake of time, and I don't want to be boring like other people, not here. Not here, sorry, I'm very traumatized this morning. So I'm just gonna showcase two of the works that we're doing. So we started with Macho Land, and we started with occupying Macho Land. And those days we were not as feminist as we are today. So everybody wanted to occupy Wall Street, and we wanted to occupy Macho Land, as in the land of machos. And now we just want to change it. We don't want to occupy anything anymore. We just want to eradicate it from the word. That's it. And then little by little, we created the only BI plus resource in Persian, and little by little we listened to the questions that were coming. There were a lot of literally like sexual questions, because the word bisexual comes with sex in it. So people were like, oh, these people are intersex people who are there for both sex, so we're gonna have a threesome or foursome with them. So there was a lot of sex questions. So we created a platform for sex education, but for everyone. And then little by little, of course, we are eco-feminists, and then we evolved. And then I ended up one day with thinking, okay, I want to address the person who hates me the most inside Iran. So I put an image of, I just started to draw. I'm not a good drawer, maybe a good potter, but not a drawer. A 10-year-old Baluchi girl who is about to get married and doesn't know a thing about periods, doesn't know a thing about the legal frame of Iranian government, like binary, totally based on violence against women. And I thought, I want to talk to that person who doesn't have internet, who doesn't know me, who always, I had a sight card, who already could hate me because of my shaved hair or anything. And I created Hamdam, and Hamdam is the only application period tracker with Jalali calendar. You might know that Iranians use a different calendar than a lot of other countries. And that makes it much easier for people to use it. But it was a period tracker, and that was really the hard part, because I didn't want to have a standard body saying like, okay, every 28 days you're going to get your periods, or, oh, 2 days to your periods, maybe you want to buy your chocolate, and so on. And this is how I started to understand how much gender-based violence it is actually in the application creation, and how our bodies, female-assigned bodies, are actually a source of income for anybody, for Clue, for any other period tracker, because they get our data and they sell it as scientific data. You just say, yes, I want to use my data, and then they show you a female assigned body of a white person who's living in northern hemisphere of the world, who has access to a smartphone, and they tell you, well, it's normal among women that they want to eat avocado on their 13th day in the afternoon after their first drop of whatever period. And this is happening. This is a whole marketing thing. And in that application, I also, we as a team, we also integrated the whole legal frame of the Iranian family law, and how we could circumvent it, like how to get more legally, get more rights, not still equal, and how to check your breast for breast cancer, and so on, violence in case of rape, what to do, what not to do, and also a button to call the social emergency. But to your question, of course, you can see I think before I talk, but I don't have a lot of barriers when I speak to use the words. So in that Hamdam, we were already very much, of course, this is part of our identity. We don't want to emphasize on binary of gender. We didn't talk about equality between men and women, or men and women equity, but we said gender equality. And people can count the genders. How many genders there is? 2 for you, that's fine for me. 3 for me, that's fine for you. So it's really that gentle speaking. I can still defend every content that it is in Hamdam, even if it's like 5-6 years old. We definitely have to update, but we're always trying to find the right words and right language. I go back to the cultural conversation. You know, Iran has been under pressure, and political, social, cultural, a lot of things, and oppression since a long time. So for many words that we use, I am using so naturally in English, we don't have a proper Persian word or Farsi word, let alone Dari or even Pashto. So even still in Pashto, we call, I'm sorry for this language that I'm going to use. It might be triggering, but official documents call the LGBTQ people faggot. Official documents. And that is the only word that people actually understand what we're talking about. So one part of our work is to use the English, better known words, and next to it, the Farsi word. And many words we have created ourselves. and now people are using it, or we are improving. So it's a work of everyday work of understanding the SOGIES-based knowledge, as every one of us does, and then trying to understand how am I going to transfer this to a community where they do not have access to this information.
Thank you. Navigating one opposition to the another, and this is a question for you. How have anti-gendered movements in Sri Lanka and South Asia impacted your advocacy work for LGBTQI rights and access to?
That's a very, I think, relevant question, because this anti-gender movement it's not a South Asian thing. The anti-gender movement is coming from the West. It is a very much evangelical, Christian, white, Western narrative that is now being imposed on the rest of the world, particularly South Asia and Asian cultures and religions. It is causing a lot of harm already. And the harm is coming through the avenues of either evangelicalism, through the missionaries, through social media, a lot on Twitter. We're seeing a lot of this anti-gender narrative. This thing that, the concept of gender is a new invention, which it isn't, right? Gender is not a new thing. If trans persons did not appear overnight in New York City, right? They were not discovered by Washington, D.C. Trans persons and LGBT people have existed throughout history, throughout all civilizations. When you read the Dhammapada to the Hindu philosophies, trans persons are presented constantly. LGBT persons are constantly presented. Most Hindu gods have different gendered versions of themselves, right? So this is not anti-Asian to be trans or LGBT. This anti-gender narrative is actually giving us a lot of headaches because of how it's being presented and how people are buying into what are called crap, right? This nonsense coming from the West now, and the damage it's causing, because in Sri Lanka actually this damage has gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and we saw this with the Supreme Court's determination to the Gender Equality Bill. Now, the Gender Equality Bill was a very, very progressive piece of legislation put forward by the last president of Sri Lanka, Wickramasinghe. And the purpose of the bill was to ensure that there was non-discrimination for persons based on their sex, their gender, their sexual orientation, and non-discrimination in the avenues of accessing healthcare, right to education, privacy, so recognizing specific rights, and a right to have a family life, irrespective of these characteristics. So it's a very progressive piece of legislation, and also it's not like it was asking for anything. It was not like it was wanting anything sort of out of the ordinary, right? Access to be able to access healthcare, irrespective of your sex, gender, or sexual orientation, shouldn't be a surprising request. To be able to be educated shouldn't be a surprising request. To have some level of privacy shouldn't be a surprising request. To have your own family not to be, homelessness is a major issue for LGBT plus persons, and especially in the trans community. So you should have certain rights and protections. But in Sri Lanka, we don't have post-enactment judicial review, but we have pre-enactment judicial review. So that means when a bill is presented to Parliament, people can challenge that bill on their constitutionality. And this bill got challenged at the Supreme Court. And the challenge to this bill actually happened so there's a 2-week period when you can challenge this bill. And the challenge to this bill literally happened on the very last day of this 2-week period. Now, traditionally, the court, when such challenges have happened, the court has always allowed for interested parties to intervene later, after the 2-week period. So those are called intervening petitioners. Now, in this particular instance, the court blocked intervening petitioners from the LGBT community, from women's rights organizations, from intervening, because the court said, well, the time's up. But then it's a great violation of natural justice when the only party you're now allowing to hear is the party who is opposed to the bill, and not the parties who are in favor of the bill, which this bill will be actually impacting. Right? So that's why the concept of intervening petitioners was created by the court in order to serve natural justice. And when that determination came out, I mean, I'm a lawyer, and I mean, I don't care if I'll be held in contempt for it, but there was garbage, that determination. I wanted to vomit because it was not based in law. It was purely based on the prejudices of the judges sitting on that panel. I mean, the presiding judge said there was no such thing as gender. And this is a new invention of 50 years ago. That was the determination. And the judge also said that, that the rights, that recognizing a right to equality based on sex or gender will be violating the rights of religion and culture. There's nowhere in the constitution of Sri Lanka or any law in Sri Lanka which gives precedence to religion and culture, whatever that is, to someone's constitutional right to equality. And then there was another judge which said, so one of the concepts of this legislation was to have what's called a gender focal point. Which would be an official in the public sector or in the private sector who will be responsible to ensure there is no gender-based discrimination for sexual harassment. I mean, to be honest, the biggest beneficiary of this legislation was going to be cisgendered women, right? That was the biggest beneficiary because we have to accept, women are the majority, cisgendered women are the majority. So they were going in terms of, sort of marginalized groups. And so they were going to be the biggest beneficiary. So a gender focal point. And then one judge said, to regulate private companies by requiring a concept of gender focal point would be violating the legislative power of the people and therefore requires a referendum. And then there was another judge, a female judge on the panel, who I believe has a PhD or has a background in gender and gender studies, and she agreed with the other two judges. So it was the most garbage of determinations I have ever read, and that is a direct result of the anti-gender narrative, which has creeped in Sri Lanka and into the court, because a year before, when the decriminalization of same-sex relations bill was challenged in the Supreme Court gave a very beautiful determination, recognizing the right to equality, recognizing the fundamental rights of LGBT persons, the need to have the penal code repealed or amended in order to achieve these rights. And in this determination, that same court, although with a different bench, actually spoke about sections 365 and 365 of the penal code. And the presiding judge said, we will never allow for this law to be repealed because it goes against our culture and religion. This is 1 year later, right? So yes, the anti-gender narrative of the West is very damaging. And we have to be more vigilant about it as a South Asian society, because it's creeping into all our institutions. And I feel its primary target, the LGBT community, is probably just a collateral damage of it. The primary target is cisgendered women, right? That is, I feel, the biggest threat which these anti-gender people are finding, and they are the primary targets. So I think we have to be vigilant.
Actually, so true, because, I want this to be shifted into that hall in the morning. So much so.
So
Yeah,
to
please.
disrupt,
Please.
with all due respect to you and the Western countries, no, Iran has created anti-gender thing like many years ago. Please, that is our, we have created that. Please, not everything good comes from West. No, but I just want to mention that it's yes in the Western countries, and I think we will discuss this in the opposition panel. They're very well organized, but they're very much friends with country delegates like the Islamic Republic of Iran. So it's not coming only from the West. They're learning from each other, and since at least 45 years now in Iran, we have the anti-gender movement in place. Not identifying as anti-gender, but they are anti-gender people. So I think it's much closer to us than the West. Please give the credit to Iranian government. Thank you.
And it's not even just external anymore. It's inside our community also now, you know?
Yeah. So, okay, very last question from my end, and then I'll flow. From legislations to the last mile, coming back to SRHR and HIV especially, what steps can be taken to improve access to integrated SRHR and HIV services specifically for sex workers, especially when we say last mile, in a lot of South Asian context, it is rural, underserved. So any specific learnings from this meant or your own observations, Sonal?
Sure. I think one of the most primary observations is that the interventions that have worked the best are community led. So the thing is, I was just feeling so much echo when you were speaking, actually, Aritha, that many times people who have no clue of our lived lives, lived reality, are making judgments for us, and they assume that they're doing us they understand it, they're doing a favor, and they think that we are incapacitated to make decisions for ourselves, and that is how these decisions are sort of being made. And it's a similar story for sex worker communities. And like I said, that a lot of the government ministry, similar to what's happening with LGBT, they keep conflating trafficking with sex work. They remove the agency out of it, multiple things. So I think the lived reality, sorting those problems out I find that community-based organizations have really sort of championed it. And I can give you some examples. So for example, there is a very famous organization from India called the DMSC, which is the Darbar Mahila Samiti. Yeah. So, they have their own self-regulatory bodies actually who ensure that within the communities there isn't any sort of trafficking happening, because, that's one allegation that comes towards the community, and that has actually helped them work with, different government bodies also in creating access. The second piece is also like a great example, again, is Ashodhya Samiti, the one which did the sex worker assessment, that they have actually recognized that it's so important that, we know our rights. So I agree with Anaya, the fact that you knew it. So many people don't even know it. So how do you go and fight in the police station? And sometimes it's not even, the particular law that's being used. It's like some random law is being used, like a, law on nuisance is being used. Or it's not even that. They're just like, we are not going to register an FIR or an NC, you're not going to register a complaint only, even despite the law existing, right? So then them recognizing that it is the community which has to be trained to kind of negotiate with this, with these kind of bureaucratic procedures or, ways to red tape the whole thing. We have Shale over here also. They have a great, legal aid available, like almost, I think, 2,000 lawyers available, right? Like as a legal aid support unit. So they do have trained lawyers, like a lawyer network. I don't know the numbers. I could be totally wrong, but I know that it is a legal network which is you are able to access as communities to, be able to sort of understand this. And I find that also these sex worker networks, like, for example, the Nepal sex worker network, the National Network of Sex Workers in India, the sex worker network in Nepal, all of them have actually pushed for great, policy level support. In terms of I think one, of course, you said now the access to SRHR. Again, the push, it has been happening, for example, in the HIV movement. What tends to happen, it's only around HIV services. So most community-based organizations, they will be working on HIV services mainly as programs. But they are not turning somebody away who has a gender-based violence issue. You will find most community-based organizations, they'll use that as support, but, try to address every situation, whether it's a situation of violence, it's a situation of anything, mental health. often without that support, but at least they get the support to sort of come together. I think the another thing that's sort of changing is like with the, sex worker networks, it's shifted a little bit. The assessment shows that it's moved to digital. So it's not the same way necessarily like how it used to be earlier. A lot of the, they're operating on WhatsApp networks and things like that. So there is a kind of new element of digital violence that appears into this entire scenario, right? So again, it has actually really been communities who've been able to, sort of work through these nitty-gritties and ensure, kind of support.
Thank you so much, panelists. Wonderful discussion. As you were talking about the, anti-gender movement, anti-rights movement. Yeah. If I speak, in perspective of Bangladesh, I don't know how I will explain, we have started, as you know, Bandhu is an organization that, started in 1996. So after 26, 27 years of intervention movement, I don't know in which direction we are now moving ahead. We are nowhere in the country. Every day receiving death, every day receiving, organization, shut down. Then, the LGBTI population, disappear from the country. So this is happening. My question is, yes, we discussed about, sort of challenges, how it is damaging, individual organizations. But the point is, as an activist, as an organization, collectively, how can, what steps can be taken? I think that is important. That needs to be, come out. So in Bangladesh, the Transgender Protection Act, the problem has started from there. Once we have started issues around incorporating, sort of comprehensive education section in the textbook board. So problem has started from there. So now the issues is that there is a resistance to accept, the gender word itself in the country. But my experience to dealing with over the past years, they are very well organized, they are well funded, they are well coordinated, and as you rightly mentioned, in Iran, that, every single, sort of accounts, there are person following, like, how many people they have engaged in terms of, in terms of monitoring our activity. Just 2 weeks back, the last one I saw, they produced 35 minutes videos based on my activism. What approach we have followed, the way they have make the 35 minutes start, we followed the public health approach, HIV, and then slowly, where we are today, now we are approaching LGBTI and so on and so forth. So colleagues, what strategies collectively can be taken? I think one could be coming up some positive narratives, not to defend them, but rather, the narratives are coming from them every day, every week. From us, I think, they're using, sort of quote from Quran, religious books, but similarly, whether collectively someone can take initiative in terms of coming up some positive narratives about us so that it can, be posted in social media. More interestingly, whenever any post comes from that side, in 1 hour time, I don't know how it actually reaches 2 million and million views. That is another, sort of critical area. Views and comments and all those, I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to. No, I couldn't agree more with you. There's a very, very well-funded, well-coordinated movement, anti-gender movement, and it's using our own language to turn the table around. So the word gender itself, the usage of the word itself is now in question. Transgender doesn't exist. Sex doesn't exist. None of that exists. And more than that, also, like we are finding, it's actually so well coordinated. I'm sure there are some people from the anti-gender movement in this room also. Okay, they are in UN spaces. They are everywhere. They are everywhere. But but I do think that there's something to also learn from this well-coordinated approach, which is that I think like on the other end, the way Aritha sort of saying that like it's actually women are a great target from this movement. We know LGBT is a target. We know sex workers are target. But I don't think we are very well coordinated amongst us. We are all kind of operating in the silos. And then there are activists, there are comics, there are media culture people. We are not connected together. We are not well coordinated for sure, right? The second piece is like the language itself, the language that is sort of coming into question. There need to be ways of identifying how to reclaim that language back again, and that will actually really have to be like very contextual. Sorry to say, this movement is still very white, very global north. In the spaces these kind of conversations are happening, and we have to kind of turn that narrative around. The other piece, I think a very important piece that we are not talking about, that young people are talking about, is the digital space. And the digital space is definitely creating this narrative, and people like Elon Musk and other people like this, J.K. Rowling, they are very much, impacting the way we sort of think. And I think as activists, we did a lot on ground, but in the digital space, we are not challenging, the hate that is coming or the violence that is coming. In the digital space, if you try to do any kind of education around gender or sexuality, or even use the word sex, right, it is immediately invisibilized. So I think the fastest way of spreading a message, it's also already prohibited, and we are not really sort of kind of fighting back against it. And I really think that the other problem that I find, and I'll just end with that, and I'm sure people want to say, is that if I look at the funding mechanism, right, if you look at them as a funding mechanism, the organizations that have funded them for the next 50, 60 years. We are actually essentially doing advocacy work mainly as community-based organizations, where we plan for the maximum of 5 years. Most of our funders are giving money for 2 years. Yeah. So just look at that. Maybe that approach itself has to sort of change. It can't be a 2-year program. We have to think a little long term. And that's just opening the discussion. Over to you, Aritha.
So I think Sonal has covered majority part of it. I would answer you about you've mentioned that they're using Quranic ayat. So, Pakistan is also an Islamic. Yes. So, but we exist. So what we have done is, I've shared this ayat. In Quran, there is even Allah Ta'ala has mentioned us in a way. So it says that we have created men and women and men and women together, both. That means that men separately, women separately, and the third gender is trans people, the intersex people, or gender minorities. We have used this ayat since 2000. It is still well. When they give us Quranic or Islamic, something like that, we just slap them back. We're like, no, you cannot do it. In many hadith, if you'll go and look for it, the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned the trans people I'm talking. And using that umbrella, we used even in our law, we used the term gender minority. So we played it because we had to. Because, you're facing these things, we have faced worse than. Funding part is so true. Mehrab Awan, if you look her on Google, she has done her research, and she has evidence that these people, these mullahs, they got 10 times more funding than the HIV projects we are having, and we are having the funding for a quarter. They had this funding for 6 years just to end this movement, and we were like, oh my god. So before the law, it was like, if you start talking about LGBTQI community, you will go to the countries, you will have the visits, and you will be the activist, and you will have fun life. Now it's opposite. If you'll talk about the anti-gender movement and things like that, you're getting it. The recent example is Maria B. Maria B is a huge name in Pakistan. She's a designer. She had nothing to do with the gender movement, with trans people, with anyone. And she started doing stuff on internet. That transgender people, they are men. They're men in a dress. The men in a dress. She used my pictures, my colleagues' pictures, and she was doing everything. In 1 year, her brand, she opened an outlet, 4 outlets in US, 2 outlets, new outlets in London, 2 outlets, new ones in Europe. In 1 year. And her brand was not even doing that good. We were shocked. So use social media. Put everything over it. Whether it's going viral or not, use social media. Even if you're feeling not safe, put it on so that everyone will see what's actually happening. And they will start. Yes, that's what we are doing in Pakistan.
I want to be super short because very much conscious about the time. I think one thing that we tend to forget is our own mental and physical health as activists, and falling into the rabbit hole of reaction to the opposition. And they're very well organized, as you say. So they come every day with something to make us busier to respond to them. So I think that's very important to be sure that you're in a good space, and it's okay if you take off for 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, but you come back stronger. I think that's the most important. Also, my personal tip, I know that when I was born, life was not good, and when I die, believe tomorrow in 50 years, the world is not going to be an equal place for everybody. So we're just putting some little stones from here to there, and I think it just reduces a little bit of the impact they are going to have on us. Also, I recently read the book What It Takes to Heal, and my friend Mujan smiles because she's also reading it, and it's she's very active. She was or is very active in the Black Lives Matter movement, and she came up with a very beautiful vision and how us as activists have either personal traumas or have been witnessing other people's traumas. And this is how we started our activism, whatever trauma it is. And if the activism is coming from a place of pain, it is condemned to be ended very easily. But if it is coming from the vision that is leading us, we will win sooner or later. And this is something I check every day. So now I'm treating this, I'm answering this person. Is it my pain that is speaking, or is it my vision for an equal world that I'm speaking? And again, community is so important. Being in a safe space. Like this morning, I didn't feel safe at all. I was just like, yeah, I'm welcome here. Am I welcome here? Wait, where are we now? So I think that's very important to find the people, really, like your people, even if it's in like short check it. One of the last projects of Spectrum is actually mental health resilience building for activists and the LGBTQ community, and it works.
I just want to add something quick here. So in terms of how do you combat this, we have to look at the source and the origin. So we've been tracking this anti-gender movement from before it was the anti-gender movement. And before it was the anti-gender movement, it was actually the anti-COVID and anti-vax movement. And what we've seen is that a lot of these during COVID-19 and the lockdowns, there were a lot of these massive Telegram and WhatsApp groups that were formed against COVID and vaccine mandates. And these groups were well funded, and they were able to create very convincing content that COVID was, you have videos of someone like vibrating in his chair after getting a COVID vaccine, right? And people will believe that the vaccine has caused some kind of vibration. There were people attacking 5G radio antennas, thinking that these 5G antennas were spreading, something to people. So this is very convincing content. And what we saw, because some of us were monitoring some of these groups as COVID was sort of dying down, they started spreading, they wanted a new cause. Right? And this new cause became the anti-LGBT cause. And then a lot of funding trickled in, and they've been able to create very convincing content about against LGBT people, right? They are literally finding a butch, masculine man straight from the gym, putting a wig on him, and making him create a video saying he's a trans woman. This is exactly what they're doing. And they're disseminating this, and people are believing, oh, a trans woman is a butch man who decides to put a wig on himself, and now he's coming into the woman's bathroom to perv on women. No, but this is how the negativity of how they're creating this content is being done this way, right? So that it looks like this is a conspiracy to attack cis women by the LGBT community. That is, and children, right? Like children are being forced into gender affirming surgery. There is no country in the world where a child can be subject to a gender affirming surgery. You have to be an adult in order to go through their process. But in these same countries like the United States, a 16-year-old girl can have a breast enhancement surgery, as a cosmetic surgery or a nose job if they want to. No one is debating that, right? But they have created this whole thing that somehow, trans children, there are these trans kids who are being forced into these surgical interventions. So they're creating very convincing content, and we have to be, based on fear, and we have to be prepared for that. And what we're also seeing by monitoring incidents is that actually, when I said is cis women are the target, is because actually a lot of the backlash, even though it's supposed to be against LGBT persons, it's a cis women who are actually suffering a lot out of it. So we've had cases where, a cis woman who is not fitting this narrative of what a woman should be, like she could be, having short hair, or a woman who went through alopecia or is having cancer treatment and therefore has lost hair, a woman who is stockier, they are being physically assaulted and attacked because they're perceived to be trans, even though they're not, because social media is convincing people that the trans woman is this butch masculine man who is putting a wig and pretending to be a woman, right? So, this is where we're seeing the attacks happening, the targeting of cis women who are not fitting this narrative, and that's why I said cis women have to be prepared, because that is the ultimate target, right? That is who they're coming from.
Talking about intersex children, it's a whole different,
I think I'm not the only one who doesn't agree with your vision that cis women are the biggest target here. I think population-wise, maybe they're the biggest target, but they're definitely the LGBT community is the target. Look at Iran, that if the LGBTQ community, an individual is living in Kurdistan, that Baluchistan, you don't even exist. And actually cis women still do benefit from the laws. Still, I mean, yeah, they do benefit from the laws. They can be a cis woman. I cannot be myself. I cannot be me. I don't exist in the Iranian law, let alone the trans person. In Iran, you have to go through the surgeries, the whole, the top, everything. And it's not a surgery, it's the slaughtery. People go in the operation room, they come out of it like after 16 hours, not human anymore. So cis women still do have the privilege. And they will keep it.
I 100% agree with you. I am talking about this new anti-gender movement that is coming out of the West. So I'm speaking particularly on this new movement.
Okay. Yeah, we can have just one last question because I've already had a couple of signals from my other colleague.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah, and thank you for this wonderful panel. And the first thing that I also did, where can I buy folks, which is that. And the sad part is this diversity and inclusion should be part of every conversation, how we talk about reproductive health, should be a conversation of LGBT issues. Similarly, I want to sort of push the conversation a bit. I want to invite you all to talk about a bit, especially when we talk about in the South Asian. I disagree, that the anti-gender movement is especially came from the West. I believe, from a caste society, caste has particularly harmed disability rights and LGBT rights, and why I sort of want to think about caste and sexuality is because because we are assigned certain labor, transgender supposed to be in certain jobs, and that reflects in our policies, because just as how you mentioned, similarly we also have a gender protect, and the act sort of asserts a right about that transgender people do they have a right to work. So they created programs where they would capacitate, strengthen their employability, but those employabilities are always imagined vocational studies or vocational training, or so it's not never imagined trans people can they can be in much higher positions, not you got my point, right? Or or any policies around that sort of controls women's sexuality directly queer people. So what I think is how this has turned anti-gender movement has really fanned what caste harm that caste and religious fundamentalism has done to the queer rights.
Yeah. I think it brings so many thoughts, and I'm sure all of us want to sort of respond to it. I've been deliberating about this whole thing as well, and 100% agree with you that there are many fractures within the movements as well. But I think one thing to particularly note about the LGBTQI movement is that a majority of the movements could really become a full-fledged movement and not just a collective trying to do some advocacy was owing to the HIV movement. And unfortunately, when I look at this HIV movement, it's not necessarily well connected with the other movements in the country before that, whether it's a feminist movement or anti-caste movement or whatever. What I find is that, at least say from the context of India, previous to the HIV movement, when activists came together, they were very intersectional in their approach in challenging oppression. They were very intersectional about it. But I think since the HIV movement has sort of come in, it has got separated, right? Now, in terms of the anti-gender movement and saying that it's always existed, I am not going to agree with that, because the thing is, there's always always been opposing parties, there have been opposing ideologies, there's been stigma and discrimination, but they were not as strong and well coordinated. And they are this strong and well coordinated because of Christian evangelical organizations coming and funding them with that kind of money, right? To come together and actually very, what do you call it, very strategically, this strategies divide whatever you can. And so when I say I can see it within the community, if I'll talk about caste, some of this stuff that, the Hindu community, LGBT community is saying is so deeply sort of problematic. And what is happening is now, instead of having I'm not saying we all have to be on the same page, but we were more or less similar on most issues. But now it's like you have to just pick and choose. You can, you talk to anybody, you are kind of afraid because you don't know fully what their stand will be on a particular thing. They may be similar to your ideology on a particular thing and then completely different. And sorry to say, even feminism has become a little bit like Puritarian. So it's like me and my 3 friends are feminists. The rest of the people are not true feminists, So some way we are not like also like holding space for polarity. So I think that's what's actually holding back. And the last thing I want to say is that all of this is really fueled by the politics of hate. And I find that our entire conversation is centered around the politics of hate, right? Even as activists, we are constantly raging, we are constantly angry, we are responding in rage. And, I feel so much resonance with Soudeh. Like, it's kind of killing us slowly inside, even if we genuinely believe it's a righteous cause. And I feel like that language has to shift to the politics of love. And that's, I know, crazy because the Christian movement kind of uses that itself to like propagate religion does. But can we reclaim that as a movement and change that language, take it, sort of back in our hand? That's the only way I think that we can sort these issues of polarity. And I think gender movement also, one last thing I want to say that, when there are polarities, usually you will see that one side of the polarity gets really heightened. But eventually with time, it has to come back balance. And I think we are at a space where it's not possible, like maybe not in the time we are alive, but it's not possible that this is not going to get challenged. It is going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope so. But I just wanted to mention, I think we cannot have this conversation without really saying the word colonization. All of us here have been colonized, either like physically, either our mental or our cultures. And I think one thing, at least, that Spectrum is facing, at some point, we started to translate articles instead of writing them. Of course, I write better than translating. This is my first language, right? It was like, okay, a white person has so maybe that's better. And I think that has a big impact. Individually and collectively, we still think we are not good enough. And everything that's happening in whatever laboratory in, you call them like Western, or I call them the minority world, it's better than us because we have had no culture, because we had no technology and so on. I really think we have to go inside ourselves. I do find myself sometimes looking at myself like smaller than others. I live in a white country, and every single day I'm standing out. I'm like, well, in Iran we do that, and I do all sort of crazy stuff, and I say, yeah, we Iranians do that, forget about it, right? So I think that's very important, having colonization in mind. That is still ongoing. How is civil society in diaspora created? The Iranian case, it's about the donors. So donors say, how do you contribute to regime change? How do LGBT people participate in elections? I mean, we cannot have a queer person as a candidate in Iran. We cannot have somebody who doesn't wear hijab as a candidate in Iran. How do you want? So I won't have the money, I won't have the power, my work is not going to be sustainable, I'm going to be mentally tired, and fatigue is not. So it's a whole, our civil society, the Iranian civil society, is still being colonized. And this creates diversions, and this creates that we don't have one space to be able to speak to each other.
Adding to said, very conversation around this, because I would say my lived experience, especially when the first English speaking upper class gay men start organizing, they actually deliberately put people who would not know English out a lot. I would trans movements, especially in India, I can't say about other countries, but in India, this is so much of a reality when you talk about class, where you from. A lot of, I would say, mainstream trans movement also so much centered around and the religion also for that. And I'm just being so open about it because I'm just saying what is. I would surely agree to the fact that yes, fans, when you said it, does it fan it? Does in ways beyond our, and how, it kind of, manifests still, we are still kind of, questioning a lot of, we don't know how it's still kind of in the process. I would say a person like me is still very deeply afraid and concerned because we don't want those, divisions within already fragmented. Anyway, so sorry, could not kind of, stop speaking about, especially very last one. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you so much for that comment. I think privilege is a beautiful thing when you're transparent about it, when you are ethical about it, and when you use your privilege good, and not to misuse your privilege to just seem, lack of better words, a white savior complex, but your brown privilege version of it. So I think that's really important, and you need to make that difference. And a small comment on digital transparency. When you do good, there's very little people supporting you, but the minute you make a human mistake, there's thousands and thousands of people to criticize that, conveniently editing out things to their agendas. And that happens on all ends.
Thank you. So I think we've already crossed the time which was given, but we started with that. We are supposed to be disrupting this whole thing, and I think we were pretty successful, hopefully. So thank you for this wonderful panel and the wonderful audience. Anaya, Soudeh, everyone, thank you so much for this. Really appreciate it.